Okay, so my presentation is on how schema and prior knowledge affect comprehension and reading. So my main question is, what is the impact on comprehension when instruction activates prior knowledge? And in one of the articles I read, they actually had like their definition of comprehension, and I really liked it. And it's building bridges between the new and the known, which is between the text and the reader's knowledge. So what they knew before, what they're learning, and what is being presented to them. So in the first article I read, it was called Improving Reading Through Prior Knowledge and Writing, and this was a literary analysis. So the guy who wrote this just took a bunch of studies and information and compiled it together, but he tied reading and writing together, and I know that's like a basic known thing, like, oh, if you read, you write, and if you write, you read. But he really showed how they're connected to each other. So first they talked about using pre-reading exercises, and this was from a man named Langer. And so this helps teachers determine what a student knows before they start reading a book. So if the book is about World War II, the teacher can ask a bunch of questions like, okay, when was World War II? What do you guys know about World War II? And have the students answer. And this will just help the teacher know where the students are at with that subject, the vocabulary they know. So it also depends on the age they're at. But that helps them determine that. And then they can judge how much additional background information and vocabulary the students will need before they start reading. So if you ask your students questions about World War II and they know absolutely nothing, that shows the teacher that, okay, I need to take a step back, teach a little mini lesson about World War II, and then we could start reading the book so they can better understand like the setting, what was going on at the time. And this just shows like how much it is important that students have the background knowledge. Then also in that article, for the writing portion, Brewer talked about being able to identify the type of writing that is being done that students are reading. So the main goal of writing, basically. So whether that's to entertain, persuade, for pleasure, or to inform. And if students can identify that while they're reading, they can better understand. So if you're reading an article that's to inform you, you don't take it as like, oh, this is just for entertainment. You can take it as like, this is information like I can use. And so this also keys into students being able to hone in on like their own personal feelings and ideas and thoughts and experiences, which is technically prior knowledge and schema. Like your own experiences and ideas are your prior thoughts and schema. So if you can identify that in writing from someone else, then that helps you better identify that in your writing. And this will better help your comprehension and knowledge about a topic. And then finally, in that same article, a man named Petrosky looks at students' responses to a text. So their actual writing responses, and he compared weak writing responses with strong writing responses, and the weak writing responses lacked explanation and description, whereas the strong writing responses had specific connections and personal interpretations, and this again just like reiterates a student's schema or prior knowledge of the writing or the reading they did. So those are just like the three things that this article talked about and how important it is that prior knowledge is reviewed and thought about when students are reading and writing. The next article I read was Prior Knowledge and Reading Comprehension Test Bias by Peter Johnson, and this was actually a study done on the comprehension of a text and how this affects students' testing, and if there's a bias in it or not. So the main thing with this was it depended on the types of questions that were asked. So they could either ask scripturally implicit questions, which is where the text and some background knowledge is used. So you need information from the text, but also you need your own prior knowledge. Or there was also textually implicit questions where you read the text and the answer is right in the text. Like you don't need any other background information. So that's like the main thing with testing is it just depends when students are reading, it really depends on the type of question that is being asked, whether they need their prior knowledge to answer the question or not. But it is found that having prior knowledge will help better with the comprehension. Another important thing with that was the vocabulary. So not always was it that if a student had great prior knowledge, could they answer a question better. Sometimes students who really understood the vocabulary of a text could better understand than students who did not have good vocabulary. But then also, at some points, if they had great vocabulary and a great prior knowledge, they answered the question great. So it just kind of depends on the student, but that did show a test bias. Also, I found this interesting. They had students read 3 different texts that were 650 to 750 words long, and then answer a set of questions about those texts. And they found that boys overall do better if boys and girls, if they're reading a text on war, the boys generally do better and are more interested and comprehend better. And I just thought that was super interesting because it always seems that like boys are more interested in that, but it just shows that they really are and they can better comprehend that stuff. And then finally, so that one did prove that prior knowledge influences and increases reading comprehension, but a big part of it is like the student themselves and how they learn. And then finally, the last article I read was teaching reading comprehension by connecting the known to the new. And this was also a literary analysis, so she just took a bunch of information and compiled it together. But she talked about teaching reading comprehension and prior knowledge before, during, and after reading. So before reading, like I said earlier, you would ask the students questions like, what do you think this is about? What do you know about this time period? Things like that. And then during reading, after they read like a chapter, she'd be like, okay, what happened in this chapter? What do you know, like how does this connect to what we already talked about, like with World War II? How does this connect with what we talked about World War II? And then after reading, she talked about having students summarize their reading and then make new connections that they learned through their reading to develop their prior knowledge or their schema. Also, so in this article, they used a model by American psychologist David Rumelhart, which shows the relationship between prior knowledge and inferring and comprehension. So it starts with like the input from the text, and then it goes into prior knowledge. And within this process, students use decoding, vocabulary meaning, grammar or syntax, and then with inferencing skills, they use passage structure and cohesion, and that results in the meaning. So prior knowledge and schema isn't just one specific thing. There's so many things when you're reading that you have to take into account that students need to know. And if one of these things is lacking, so if you have students who have good vocabulary meaning in grammar or syntax, but like can't decode what is being said, they're going to struggle. So it just shows that the process is really long and there's a lot of things that go into it. And it's really important for students to do pre-reading and for teachers to help the students with the pre-reading so they can really help develop the prior knowledge of the student and the schema so that later on they can use that information. And I really like this topic because I think as a teacher, you should be helping students prepare for the future. And so if a student just reads something and has no prior knowledge and gains nothing from it, you're not really teaching them anything or helping them gain anything because everything you do is going to build off what you learned later in life. So I really enjoyed this. And then finally, I just gave an example of a good way for students and for teachers to figure out a student's prior knowledge. So you can use a KWL chart, which is a know, want, learn chart. So in the know column, you start with before you're reading. So you write down, you ask students, okay, what do you know about this topic? And you write down everything they know. And you keep this like chart up on the board while you're reading. And then want to know, this is also a pre-reading stage. So before you start reading, you say, okay, what do you want to learn about this topic? What do you want to know, like how the character acts, how the family reacts, or anything like that. And then after you're finished reading is when you fill out the learn column, and you just say, okay, what did you learn? And you write down everything you learned. And this shows students where they started and where they are now, and shows them that they did learn something and develop their understanding of the topic. And then this helps teachers also to know, like, if they needed to start further back, or if they could have skipped some of the pre-reading they did, and then if they were able to teach students a lot about the subject, or if they needed to go deeper in the meaning, depending on how much the students know. So in conclusion, obviously, we learned that pre-reading, or that schema and prior knowledge really does influence the comprehension of a text. And it depends on the student, of course, but it does develop a stronger comprehension of the text and an overall better understanding of life in general and how students perceive things. So, any questions?